Thanks again, everyone, for joining today's webinar. And now I'll give the floor to Ms. Leticia Damares.
Thank you. Thank you, Malet. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Reflections on Setting the New Collective Quantified Goal on Climate Finance, where we are and where we need to go. We are joined today by a distinguished group of climate finance thought leaders and negotiators for a discussion on one of the most important ongoing climate negotiation process, the new Collective Quantified Goal on Climate Finance, NCQG. We are also honored today to have one of the co-chairs of the ad hoc work program on the NCQG with us. Welcome, and we really appreciate the work that the co-chairs put into delivering the work plan in March as mandated by the COP. This is extremely helpful for all stakeholders involved in this process to know what the issues will be covered in the upcoming TEDs in 2023. Fiona will be presenting a hot from the press work plan that was released yesterday, and our panelists will have the opportunity to reflect on it. My name is Leticia Damares, and I am the Program Director of the Island Energy Program in the Climate Finance Access Network at RMI. The Climate Finance Access Network that is hosting this event today is currently coordinating a project titled Informing the NCQG Process with generous support from the government of Germany. This project, started last year, and it seeks to provide science, evidence, and equity-based input to inform the conversations around the NCQG during the negotiation themselves, but also in between the sessions, as we are doing today. As part of this project, we are producing a series of technical papers on the key topics of consideration for the negotiation process. They all can be found on our webpage, which is a great resource. Please visit it. I'm sure we will be linking it in the chat. This project is delivered in partnership with several organizations, including Climate Analytics, the Climate Policy Initiative, the Global Center on Adaptation, the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Open Society Foundations of Oxfam and South North. Ultimately, we hope to contribute ensuring that the NCQG effectively supports building resilience and promotes the economic transformation needed in the Global South to meet the Paris Agreement's goals, but also sustainable development goals. For those of you that are not familiar with the intricacies of the international climate negotiations, I'd like to provide some context. Developed countries in 2009 in Copenhagen committed to a collective goal of mobilizing $100 billion a year by 2020 for climate action in developing countries. The goal was formalized at COP16 in Cancun. And fast forward to the COP in Paris, COP21, that adopted the Paris Agreement. This goal was reiterated and extended till 2025. At COP26 in Glasgow, an ad hoc work program was launched to initiate the deliberations for setting this new goal by 2025. This work program will have to conclude its work at COP 2019 in 2024. So we are about we'll be halfway in this process at the Bonn session in June. As part of this work program, 4 annual technical expert dialogues and 1 annual high-level ministerial dialogue will be convened between 2022 and 2024. Since the beginning of the work program, 5 technical expert dialogue, the TEDs, and 1 high-level ministerial dialogue have been held. The technical dialogues have surfaced many of the key substantive issues that must be resolved in order to arrive to the NCQGs. While the first 2 TEDs identified the broad landscape of issues and elements for further elaboration, the subsequent TEDs took a deep dive in some of those thematic issues. The most recent TED, TED 5, that was held in Vienna at the beginning of this month, focused on temporal scope and structure of the NCQG, and I think we are going to hear a bit more on this TED from Fiona. The clear guiding questions and options that were put for consideration and for reflection really allowed the participants to have focused and deeper discussions as compared to the previous TED. So we wanted to acknowledge how the progression in the TEDs is showing more and more focus and more practicality in the discussions. Even though there was no substantive decisions on the NCQG last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, it is critical that the discussions from the TEDs are constructively captured and feed into the decisions that parties are going to take in the coming COPs. Especially, we can imagine that after the GST, the Global Stocktake, more of its outcome will have to be included in the discussions. In today's discussion, we aim to get to a common understanding of what should be achieved this year, to get to a successful outcome next year. During our panel, our guests will share their views on the process, including on the TEDs, the high-level ministerial dialogues, and how deliberation from these dialogues can be appropriately prepared, captured, and incorporated within the NCQG's discussions. So we will start with a presentation of the work plan by the co-chairs of the ad hoc work program of the NCQGs by Ms. Fiona Gilbert, who is joining us from literally the other side of the world from where I stand now. And thank you so much for joining us at such a late hour. And this will be followed by a panel discussion. We hope to focus our conversation on concrete steps forward and ways to ensure that the NCQG negotiation process is equitable, transparent, and informed by developing country needs, and is also evidence and science-based. I am joined today by other colleagues from the Climate Finance Access Network for this event, including Malet Ayasumelki, our thought leadership lead, who is also the coordinator for the Informing the NCQG Process project. Malet will be our moderator today. So thank you again for joining this event, and a special thanks to our panelists. I wish you frank and fruitful discussions. Over to you, Malet.
Thank you, Letitia, for the opening remarks, and thanks to our panelists and virtual participants for joining us today. So now I'm honored to introduce our panelists. Ms. Fiona Gilbert from Australia, who is the co-chair of the ad hoc work program on the NCQG. Ms. Fiona has a development assistant background and has worked on climate finance since 2011, including on Fast Start Finance, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Green Growth Institute, and climate finance programming through Australia's official development assistance program. She has also managed the Australian government's relationship with the OECD Development Assistance Committee. Since 2018, Ms. Fiona has led Australia's climate finance negotiations in the UNFCCC and is Australia's representative on the UNFCCC Standing Committee on Finance. Ms. Fiona also works on promoting and harnessing traditional Australian Indigenous knowledge and nature-based solutions for climate change. Thank you so much, Ms. Fiona, who's joining us from Australia, which is very late now, and she will try to stay as long as she can, but she may drop in the last hours, the last minutes of the webinar. Thank you, Ms. Fiona. Next, I have Mr. Jan Kowalczyk from Oxfam. Jan is a senior policy advisor for climate change at Oxfam, Germany. Jan has followed the UN climate change negotiations for the past decade, including the negotiations around the Paris Agreement and its implementation. Mr. Jan worked for several years for the Brussels office of the European Network of Friends of the Earth as a senior policy advisor on European energy and climate policy. His areas of work include German climate policy and the international architecture to financially support poor countries in dealing with climate change, with a special focus on climate finance from Germany. Thanks again, Ian, for joining us. Next, we have Ms. Asetu Kamara from the Gambia. Ms. Asetu is a deputy director in the Gambian Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. She is the minister's focal person on climate change and has more than 10 years of experience in planning for development. She serves as a climate finance negotiator for the least developed countries under the UNFCCC and is a representative of the group as an alternate member on the Green Climate Fund board. Thank you again for joining us, Ms. Asetu. Next, we have Mr. Dominic Malay From the UK, Dominic is an environmental economist with over a decade of experience in climate finance across the public, private, and third sectors, 4 years of which have been centered on the UNFCCC negotiations. He's currently serving as one of the UK's deputy head of delegation to the UNFCCC, overseeing the UK's finance adaptation, transparency, and engagement teams. His areas of work include engagement with the new Collective Quantified Goal process, efforts to promote the transparent delivery of developed country public finance commitments, including enhanced access, and work to promote greater interaction between the UNFCCC and broader initiatives to climate-proof the global financial system. Thanks a lot, Dominic, for joining us. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Ms. Sofia Vargas from Colombia. Sofia is one of ILAC's lead finance negotiators and is the advisor for natural finance, including climate finance at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia. Her professional experience has also focused on fields of development finance and development cooperation at the national and multilateral levels. Ms. Vargas holds a master's degree in international development from Sciences Po Paris and a bachelor's degree in political sciences and international business management from the University of La Sabana in Colombia. Thank you to our panelists for participating in today's event. To our audience, it's also a pleasure to have you here. We'll have a time at the end of the session for a question and answer, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Our team will be monitoring and compiling questions as we go. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Fiona. Ms. Fiona, please.
Thank you very much, Marlette, for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for having me today. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am joining you from, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and I would also like to extend that respect to any Indigenous people or local community representatives joining us here today. Again, it's a real pleasure to be with you. Yes, it is late, and you are right, I might drop off, both figurative and literally. So I guess I would like to just start by saying what an honour it is and what a privilege to have been appointed co-chair of the ad hoc work programme on the new Collective Quantified Goal on climate finance, along with my co-chair Zahir Fakir of the UAE presidency team. Thank you to Letitia as well for giving a bit of a background on how we got to this stage. I might just pick up at the COP26 point in Glasgow, and that is where we agreed the ad hoc work programme, that it would be 3 years and that the goal would be agreed at the end of 2024 at COP29. And as Letitia mentioned, yes, the ad hoc work programme consists of 4 technical expert dialogues a year, several rounds of submissions, and an annual high-level ministerial event as well. What we heard during COP27 after 1 year of the ad hoc work programme was that the process needed to be strengthened. It needed to be more predictable in terms of laying out the work plan for the year so that participants had guidance on what would be discussed at each of the technical expert dialogues, that the process needed to be more responsive to the views of both parties and non-party stakeholders, including through the submission process and through the consultations and dialogues and presentations. And we also heard feedback that it needed to be more outcome orientated by summarising the discussions and presenting the information on the way forward. Zahir and I, we have tried to capture all of this feedback into the work plan, which was released about a day ago. And both Zahir and I, we had quite unique roles at COP27 on the new Collective Quantified Goal. As many of you might know, Zahir was the co-chair of the co-facilitator of the NCQG negotiating item in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I had the privilege of supporting Australia's Climate and Environment Minister, Minister Bowen, in his role as ministerial co-facilitator for this issue. And so both those roles allowed us to gain quite a useful insight into the various views of parties and groups. And so in developing our work plan, it is based on the views we heard at COP27. It is also based on the submissions we received early on this year and what we heard through party consultations that we held throughout February. And it also incorporates the views that we heard during the 5th Technical Expert Dialogue, which was held in Vienna earlier in March. So the work plan that's published, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to read and digest it, is broken up into several elements. It of course includes the mandate that we are operating under, a vision of what we hope to achieve this year, some of the themes, the organisation of work, the modalities of that work, and what we expect to deliver. The overall objective of this work plan really is to provide that predictability and planning for conducting the ad hoc work program across 2023. And as I mentioned, includes the focus areas of discussion for each of the dialogues, the format and the modalities, and the approach that Zahir and I will take to the organisation of this work. At the end of the year, we expect to develop recommendations with options on the various elements of the goal ahead of COP28. And these options would be further refined, discussed and negotiated throughout 2024 with a view to reaching a final agreement on what the new collective quantified goal would be at COP29 in 2024. So onto the themes, which I think is what many of you are interested in. We have 3 more technical expert dialogues scheduled for this year. The next one will be held in the middle of the June SBs in Bonn, and that will be on the issue of quantity and the mobilisation and provision of financial resources. So the first topic will be the quantum, and the second topic will be the mobilisation and provision of financial resources, but also including discussion on the contributors, the sources, and the integration with Article 2.1c. The third technical dialogue of this year, which is Technical Expert Dialogue 7, will be held in October, and we will hold that one on the topic of quality and transparency arrangements. So the first topic will be the quality, and this will include elements around debt distress, the composition, context, qualitative elements, impact, and effectiveness. The second topic will be around the transparency arrangements, and this is an issue that we heard consistently raised across all parties and groups as an important issue to discuss. The fourth dialogue for this year, which is the Technical Expert Dialogue number 8, that will be held in conjunction with COP28 in Dubai. And we will hold this one as a general stocktake of where we are to date, reflections on the work undertaken this year, and also an outlook to 2024. Another priority of Zahir and myself, and this is what we heard in the feedback from parties and non-party stakeholders, is the need to better harness the political process. So when we were negotiating the ad hoc work program, many parties made it very clear that it's a 2-track process, that you would have a technical track and a political track. And we heard feedback also that the high-level ministerial dialogue in Sharm el-Sheikh could have been better targeted and focused, and some disappointment that it was just a round of statements with very little interaction between the ministers. So what Zahir and I would like to do is to better utilise and harness that political track. And one of the ways we are seeking to do this, if you look at the work plan, is that we have allocated time at the end of each technical dialogue to identify those issues that could be raised and need to be raised to the political level. And we will also think throughout this year as to how to organise with the UAE presidency a more dynamic high-level ministerial dialogue. And of course, if you have any suggestions on how we could do that, we would very much welcome your suggestions, either through a submission or through consultations with Zahir and I. I think what I might do now is just give a very brief summary of the 5th Technical Expert Dialogue, which was held in Vienna in early March. This was held in conjunction and back-to-back with a meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. This technical expert dialogue, we were a little bit squeezed for time because the mandate asked us to hold the first dialogue in the first part of the year, but also send out a work plan and a submission process. So it was all a bit of a squeeze, but we managed to get there, and we decided to hold the 5th technical expert dialogue on options around the temporal scope and timeframe of the goal, as well as the structure of the goal. So they were the themes. In terms of the organization of the dialogue, we really tried to make it a little bit more dynamic. Less panel presentations, although we did have some very useful presentations, but more time for participants to really interact with each other. And we tasked each working group with coming up with options for the various elements of both the time frame and the structure, and not only coming up with those options, but also explaining to us and each other the rationale behind each option and the challenges and the opportunities of each as well. The summary of the 5th technical expert dialogue should come out imminently. It's been finalized, and I think it's just the Secretariat will send that out very shortly. If you have any feedback on that summary or any feedback on the work plan, I'd encourage you to get in touch. Zahir and I are very happy to have consultations with party and non-party stakeholders as well. There were a lot of options raised and identified across both of those areas. For example, on the time frame, we had around 10 to 15 different options and sub-options of the time frame. Similarly, on the structure, we had an enormous amount of different options, which we have tried to cluster. And to make clear what the various elements of each options are, noting, of course, that not all the options are mutually exclusive. So I will let you digest both of those documents. And again, very happy to have consultations and discuss further, in particular if you have any ideas or suggestions on how we can approach the work this year, including for the high-level ministerial dialogue. Marlette, I might end my comments there, but just to say thank you very much again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fiona, for giving us a short summary of what happened at TED 5 and also how you reached to developing the work plan, and also what to expect in the coming months for the TEDs and also the high-level ministerial dialogues. Thank you so much. Again, it's an honor to have you all with us, our panelists and also our audience. Would like to remind you there will be a Q&A session at the end of this panel, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. And now I turn to you, Jan. So what is your reflection on the work plan of the co-chairs, and what is your suggestion on how the TEDs and the high-level ministerial dialogues be organized?
Yeah, thanks very much, Marlette, and thanks for inviting me to this panel discussion, to this event. Let me start with first, Fiona, congratulating you to the TED 5, or you and Zaire. The feedback I heard from across civil society, at least, was that this TED 5 was much better than the other ones in the past year in terms of really discussing crunch issues that are relevant to the goal. So your ambition that you talked about a bit earlier, I think has been, you've met this definitely at TED 5. So this was a good start of the year, I think. The work plan, and yeah, I mean, it's been out since I think yesterday, was it? So obviously we've all, I think, rushed through reading it quickly in order for this event as well. I'm given 5 minutes if I'm not mistaken, Marlette. So I try to go through the work plan, go right into it. Things I noted that I do like, things where I see a bit of challenges, and then a few suggestions if time allows. Let's see how it goes. I like the interaction between the technical expert dialogues and the high-level ministerial dialogues that Fiona, you also mentioned. I like the idea of at the end of each of the TEDs to try to have a session, ideally not a negotiating session, but sort of an agreement, which are the issues that apparently need resolving through the input from the high-level ministerial dialogue. So that idea and that interaction, I think, can be very strong. Of course, it will always be a bit of an issue. What are the issues, and can we agree on what the issues are to lift up? I could, if I have a certain view on how the goal should look like, I could try to either lift it up or avoid an issue to be lifted up to the political dialogue, depending what my personal agenda is. So that is, of course, a challenge. This will be probably your role mostly to try to facilitate that process. So I wish you luck. I think it's possible, but I also know this is going to be quite challenging because the people at the TEDs are not technical experts, just technical experts. They're also negotiators. So they, of course, know how to deal with the idea of lifting anything up to ministers. But I really like that idea, and I hope this will get good guidance from the high-level ministerial dialogue in 2023 for the remaining year that we have with the 4 technical expert dialogues. So and I come to that in a bit. From the issues you mentioned or that I read in the work program, I like that there are lots of key issues that will be covered this year. And that is, of course, something very important. So I'm quite happy with the discussion on the quantum at the TED 6, for instance, and also the mobilization of resources. Of course, it would have been ideal to already know the issues for next year in order to understand, have we missed any issues or are they just coming next year? But I also see the downside of doing that, because if you fix everything already, you can't flexibly interact with it anymore after the high-level ministerial dialogue. But anyway, that made me think some issues might be seen as missing. So for instance, I would have liked to see, and that's maybe coming next year then, I would like to have to see the issue of loss and damage. So will this be included in the goal or not? I think this is quite a political issue to be discussed. And I would have wished to have it discussed before the coming high-level ministerial dialogue, because that's the last one to give direction to the final year. And the high-level ministerial dialogue in 2024 is very close to the adoption of the new goal. So that was a bit where I wondered, where will we have the discussion, how to include, or if and how to include loss and damage in the new goal, because there are obviously diverging views on that. I also like the guiding questions concept has worked for the TED 5, I think, pretty nicely, and this is good to do that as well. Maybe an idea here would be to prepare these guiding questions not only 3 weeks in advance of a particular TED, but for all the TEDs that are coming. So if I know what are the guiding questions for the TED 6, TED 7, TED 8, one can already start working on those in particular when these are technical issues that also need a bit of reflection among constituencies. That could be an idea. A challenge I see, I already mentioned loss and damage missing as a key issue that I would have thought would be worth discussing as a separate topic, a distinct topic. Another one is the TED 8 is only 1 day, or it's proposed to be only 1 day, since this is the one meant to be, on the one hand, to be a stock take, and on the other hand, there are so many other issues that need discussion. I was wondering, this would have been better if that could have been a bit longer. Maybe there's a way to add an extra day to the TED 7 or something to really make sure we cover all the issues that we want the ministers this year to give direction for the final year. I thought this could be an idea. And then, of course, the other challenge I mentioned was, of course, how to lift from the TED to the high-level ministerial dialogue the issues, how to agree which are the issues that apparently need resolving. That is a bit of a challenge. I spoke about this already. One issue I'm a bit concerned about is observer participation. For the TED 5, the restrictions for NGOs was massive. I think the environmental NGOs were allowed three seats at the table or behind the tables, or someone in the background. There was a practice from about a decade ago when these kind of meetings for the Standing Committee, for instance, on finance, that had no restrictions whatsoever, about 10 years ago. This has changed over time, I know that, but I find this a bit concerning that the observer participation is so restricted. And I don't see the reason for that anymore, given that the Corona restrictions no longer create a barrier where you want to limit participation and so forth. So that's something to think about. The virtual participation works in parts, but of course, it doesn't allow the interaction with key people in this process that are all present there, and virtually you can't interact with these in the breaks, for instance. So maybe that's something to think about. One of the issues I was still missing is that, and I'm going to finish in a bit, one of the themes of one of the workshops of the TED, was the integration of 2.1c. And I think this is important to discuss, but at the same time, wonder why do we not also talk about the integration of Article 9 in this? Because at least for some parties, Article 9 is more the basis of the NCQG than Article 2.1c would be. And for a balanced discussion, it could be an idea to make sure we talk about both Article 2.1c and Article 9 in the integration with the new goal. And then a few ideas on the I thought maybe it would be an idea to, instead of doing substantive presentations on certain issues that we have seen in TED 5, I found them very interesting, to be clear. But instead of doing those, one could also say, let's do a presentation that synthesizes the submissions we have received on certain guiding questions, so that people don't have to reopen working groups or whatever with reiterating statements they've already made in submissions. So maybe it helps diving quicker into the real discussions. And then the substantive presentation that, as I said, I found very useful, could also be done in the form of webinars that you mentioned in your work plan as well as an option. And then maybe that could be, one could look into making more use of such webinars to inform the discussion with substantive input as the ones that we have seen in the TED 5. One thing on the high-level ministerial dialogue in 2023, as you already said, Fiona, totally agree. It's better. It's very difficult to get ministers to really interact with each other and not just make speeches. One way to do that, or to facilitate that, let's put it that way, is that the guiding questions that may be prepared for the high-level ministerial dialogue to be very precise and very provocative. So no fluffy questions such as how to mobilize, or how could the mobilization of finance help implementing the Paris Agreement? That's a very fluffy question. And we had these kind of questions on the high-level dialogues on climate finance in the past. So no fluffy questions. Instead of a question like that, you could ask a question, should the new goal have thematic sub-goals for adaptation and mitigation, and how to deal with loss and damage or something like that? So very much on point, ideally even a yes or no question, on aspects that the goal will, or features the goal may or may not have. But okay, precise guiding question is one way to do that. But I know that ministers might not read them before they write their speeches or have their speeches written to them. And then ideally, last point is, of course, that I finished. Last point I finished is that everyone should be clear that the high-level ministerial dialogues outcomes would be the input into a CMA decision that would ideally include already a few, or capture a few substantive senses of direction, what the new goal will do, more than that has happened in the past. I mean, we always lamented that the decision didn't include any or much substantive points, and this could be, with the agreement of the ministers, maybe be different this time around. Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Jan. Yes, I couldn't stop you because they were all interesting points. And yeah, now I turn to you, Asetu. What should be the priorities for this year's states, and how should discussions from the TEDs and the high-level ministerial dialogues be captured? Thank you.
Thank you, Mahlet. Can you please start my video, because it's indicating you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. Okay, thank you. Greetings to everyone from the Gambia, and thank you so much, Mahlet, and thank you to the Climate Finance Access Network for organizing this webinar. Okay. No, sorry. I would like to basically start by thanking Fiona, the co-chair of the new Collective Quantified Goal ad-hoc work program, for presenting the 2023 work plan. And I want to express appreciation to the two co-chairs for their hard work in making so that the work plan accurately reflects the opinions of all parties. Recalling, said, like it was mentioned by the previous speaker, and recalling the last year's technical expert dialogues, most participants who took part in the technical expert dialogue appreciated the lively discussions that occurred during the dialogues, which were extremely helpful in learning about the perspectives of various stakeholders and how challenging it might be to set a new quantified a new collective quantified goal known as the NCQG. However, as mentioned by the previous speaker, these decisions ultimately they turn up to produce very significant outcome. So as a result, we really believe that this year it's really crucial that the technical dialogues that we will be having are much structured and focused to enable us to come out with a meaningful outcome. So following the first technical dialogue that was held this year in Vienna a couple of weeks ago, and the reviewing the work plan that was presented by Fiona as well, we could see, or basically I can see that we are now moving to the right lane or pathway to obtaining substantive outcome at the end. So the feedback that the previous speaker had from colleagues that attended the last TED was really reflective of what happened at that TED. So in terms of this year's technical expert dialogues, what would be the priority? I would say that it is absolutely essential at this point that we start discussing the temporal score or time frame. And this is a crucial topic that needs to be discussed, and at least a few distinct options appear to be emerging in the just concluded technical expert dialogue that was held in Vienna. So we had several options, but I think along the line, we'll be able to bridge those several options to few options that we would agree upon at the end of this process. So whether this set of options, meaning the time frame, within the medium term, maybe that is by 2030 or 2035, or it is in the long term, as mentioned by some technical experts, which is by 2050, which could be aligned with the long-term climate change strategies. I think regardless of whatever time frame we intend to come up with, it is really critical that for us to know that this time frame would really help us to determine what would be the quantum of the goal. And to some extent, it would help us to come up with realistic outcomes as well. So the second important point for me would be the quantum, which as we all acknowledge, has to be science-based and need-based, meaning taking into account the needs of developing countries. So as such, it is critical that at least we start discussing what would be the options of this qualitative figure, and that we can come up with, and that at the end we can agree on a specific figure that we can all adopt in 2024, including options on what would be or how much would be allocated for mitigation, adaptation, as well as loss and damage, which is a critical thematic area in the climate change negotiation process now. So, however, I think it is important for us to also note that this discussion, even if it starts this year, it is something that would probably continue until 2024, because both in the technical phase and in the technical space and in the political space as well. So that is important for us to note. Thirdly, I would say the third priority would be the qualitative elements, as well as transparency arrangements as well. When we are deciding how much money should be allocated towards the goal, it is important for us to take into account the qualitative aspects of climate finance, such as improving access and the effectiveness of climate finance, and the debt distress issue, which was rightly mentioned by Fiona, which I've seen that it has been reflected in the work plan. Because I think it's very important for us to note that, and considering the experience we've learned from mobilizing the 100 billion goal, it could be observed that 70% of climate finance basically were delivered through loans. And considering the debt distress that many of our countries are facing right now, and recently we have, there was a report from the World Bank which has indicated that debt distress in developing countries currently, as we speak, is it's very high. It's at a 50-year high right now. So it's very important that that is taken into account or considered when we are setting the new quantified goal to ensure that vulnerable countries like LDCs and Cs are not, their economic vulnerability are not further intensified. So moving on to how the TED and the high-level ministerial dialogue could be documented. In my opinion, these discussions could be documented in a summary report that would concisely outline the various options for both the qualitative and the quantitative elements, including as well bridging options for consideration and eventual adoption in 2024, and as well as the transparency arrangements as well for us to enable us to track progress. I think this is very important for us to take into account, and especially the issue of coming up with a climate finance definition, which was missing during the 100 billion goal. So I think these are things we really need to take into consideration in this process. So I'll stop here for now, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Asaitu, for highlighting the priorities for this year and also how outcomes from the TEDs and the high-level ministerial dialogues should be captured. And now I turn to you, Dominic. So what should be the expectations set for the high-level ministerial dialogue at COP28?
Thank you very much, Marlette, and good afternoon, morning and evening, everyone. So Dominic Malloy from the UK team. Just to flag, I'm going to speak, if possible, in more of a personal capacity than representing our view, and hopefully stimulate a bit more discussion in that way. Thank you to the RMI team and the CFAN team for holding this. I think the papers and the work you've been producing is excellent, and we need this kind of discussion to facilitate the debate throughout the negotiations over the next couple of years. So thank you for creating this space, and a quick congrats to Fiona and Zahir for having produced a comprehensive and upgraded work plan for this year, and we look forward to seeing the outcomes of TED 5. So I have the easy topic of what the ministers should discuss at COP28. I mean, I think we've already touched on it a bit. It's a tricky one for a couple of reasons. You know, you arrive at COP with very limited bandwidth. You have ministers who potentially are not all equally immersed in the topic in terms of their levels of understanding and background, and in terms of format, we've struggled in the past to generate a real discussion. And then there's the added challenge of how to use the political steers to feed back into the technical discussions. So it is a difficult task. I'm going to touch on 2 points really, one around the substance and a pitch for what the discussion could be, and then a second, a couple of points about the format and how to make that as useful a discussion as possible at COP28. On the substance, I'm going to just pick one topic here as a conversation starter. So I think Isatu and Jan touched on a few themes that are really crunchy and that will need political attention at some point, in terms of loss and damage, in terms of concessionality and addressing debt distress. But I think for me, my reflections from TED 5 last month is really that we need a political level steer at this point in the process on the scope of the goal, the fundamental scope. So Jan mentioned the interrelationship between Article 9 and Article 2.1c. That's, you know, that will resonate with some people, but for other people, not, you know, so fluent in the UNFCCC jargon. I think the question is whether we are continuing onwards with a paradigm similar to that of the 100 billion goal, which we've been working with over the past 10 or 15 years, or whether we're creating a different kind of finance goal that could, you know, be including the 100 billion style, broader, etc. And that's something that I really think would need a bit of political discussion. in terms of what that means and what would be inherent in that discussion, there are a few things that this would help flesh out. I think first and foremost, there is a reluctance, definitely from many developing country partners I've spoken to talk about a shift of the paradigm in a world where we haven't yet met the 100 billion. And that is something that has been deeply damaging to trust, and that is something that I think would benefit from political discourse. Many countries have said, look, how can we start talking about 21C, expanding the contributor base and measuring private and domestic flows when really we haven't even met the bar of the 100 billion. And I think that needs to a sense of solidarity and trust needs to be conveyed from political leaders on the developed country side. Another issue that this conversation would hopefully flush out is the slight disconnect in terms of how the goal can best address needs in developing countries and global investment needs. And at the moment, I feel like the discussions have been a bit torn between, on the one hand, a pressure to maintain the paradigm of the 100 billion and think about international public support flows, which will always only ever be in the in the billions, and 100 billion, it might scale up from that, but in the context of needs which, as we know, are far greater. So the UNEP adaptation gap report has adaptation needs in the hundreds of billions annually in developing countries. IRENA and others have energy investment needs in the trillions, and the needs determination report synthesis from the Standing Committee on Finance has bottom-up assessments of needs in developing countries in the trillions also. So I think we need a really honest political conversation about how this new goal can address those needs. And if we are staying in the 100 billion paradigm, recognition that we're only dealing with part of the story there. And so there will be a disconnect between the global investment conversation. So those are some of the things that I think could be fleshed out. And just to add a bit of a pitch, and this is something that I have found personally very appealing from speaking to folks in this space, is what's been done in the CBD COP last year. So the Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed in December, as many folks will know, and they've agreed a multi-layered international goal for nature and biodiversity finance. And that includes, at the first level, an international support goal of 30 billion annually to developing countries by 2030. That sits within a broader investment target of 200 billion annually by 2030, which captures domestic investment, private flows, which is really looking to address the needs, the investment needs gap that was identified in the literature. And they even have a bigger concept included in that goal of removing 500 billion of harmful subsidies globally. So that, for me, paints a really strong vision, and it addresses, the international support and solidarity. It addresses the investment gap in developing countries, and it addresses this kind of 21C concept about how do we realign flows, not necessarily transfers of finance, but moving our public finance away from the more polluting activities. And that's something that I think, if it would be good to get a vision from our political leadership, such that then the technical tracks could take that forward. So briefly then on the format, I think this is a really tough job. I won't spend too long on this, but I would definitely support colleagues who have mentioned that giving structured options to ministers rather than open discussions is something that's very useful. If the technical discussions can be clustered into one, buckets A, B, and C for ministers to discuss, that would be great. I think the format of the discussion needs some work. Some folks have been raising the possibility of a World Cafe type discussion where you would have informal, smaller groups. For me personally, I think there would be merit to a kind of a multi phase approach, which would allow for ministers to have some informal and bilateral time in the middle. I think we absolutely want to see full transparency in the discussion and the decision making, but I also think that when you are on mic and on screen in front of 100 other countries, there are some barriers to what ministers feel they're able to bring forward and how they're willing to find compromise with each other. And that, the final element of this is that it would be essential to allow for a dialogue in the format and avoid a situation of individual pitches from the ministers, which tends to lean towards the pre-prepared elements and doesn't help us move things forward. So just a few thoughts from me on that segment, and very happy to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dominic. And now I turn to you, Sophia. So what should be the priorities for this year's stage? I'm sure you've seen the work plan in, the co-chair's plan, so it will be good if you could reflect on that. And also, what are the desired outcomes from COP28 on the NCQG? Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Mahlet. And first, let me express my appreciation to the Climate Finance Access Network for this invitation. Dear Fiona, it's great having you here. Our acknowledgement to you and Sahir for as co-chairs for the hard work. And we welcome the work plan for 2023. Fellow colleagues and participants, I'm delighted to be here. So Mahlet, on your questions first, and kind of bringing some of the reflections of Isa too made before, I think that for us the priority it's that we can all agree at this point that this year we should arrive to a more substantive decision at COP28 CMA5. And kind of also connecting with what Dominic was saying before, we definitely we do believe that the NCQG plays an instrumental role in marshalling the trillions of US dollars in financing that we as developing countries require from all sources to implement the Paris Agreement. And we believe it in mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And we also feel that this is a good opportunity to foster climate-compatible development pathways based on the latest available science. So also touching upon the science element that was also mentioned before. We also believe that the NCQG is critical in setting out trajectories to reducing emissions to net zero and ensure development patterns are climate resilient by 2050. So in this sense, to harness this opportunity we have, so it is very important or of primary importance that we take incremental active decisions in 2023 and 2024, which is this time frame we have left. And in this way, to define the core elements of this goal, that includes, for instance, and we're going to start dealing with the quantum, so the number or numbers to it. And here also, this is to speak obviously of the quantitative elements, but also the qualitative elements, such as the principles, these elements that are very important for us, such as how to deal with what kind of quality or which instruments would be more suitable for the task we have before us, taking into account also our debt distress and limited fiscal space. So in the sense that we believe that the NCQG must be comprehensive and multidimensional, we do believe that we have to build on the lessons learned on the 100 billion goal, but also on the needs and priorities of developing countries. So there's when this paradigm discussion could come into, and definitely we would like to see more clarity on the scope of the NCQG. But definitely, and I guess the main message here is just we really want to see more substantive decisions, even if this can be a process that will keep on going until 2024. Now, how does the TED dialogues and the high ministerial dialogues fit into this process? So we believe that the 4 technical expert dialogues, we already had one this year, should result in concrete technical options and recommendations for the various aspects of the goal that will be discussed. So we already have the work plan for this year, so that we have, and to ensure a guidance conducting high-level ministerial dialogue. So in this way, to have substantive inputs from the technical experts dialogues and the ministerial guidance that will be provided therein, that are reflected in the decisions. So in this sense, we appreciate the co-chairs efforts in the new format and structure. And as mentioned, Fiona, that this strives to enhance predictability and planning of the NCQG work process. And also we welcome the focus on concrete options and issues under discussion, even if these kind of widen the spectrum. At least we already have a sense so of what we're talking on, and it's allowing us to have a more focused discussion also. So we believe that this approach will contribute to shedding light on the different dimensions of the goal, providing more elements to envisage with more clarity how the goal will look like. And finally, another priority for us would be to have a better understanding on how the NCQG is interrelated, also how it feeds, incorporates, nurtures other ongoing discussions, including, for instance, the global stocktake, the global goal and adaptation, the work on Article 2.1c and its complementarity with Article 9, and the new arrangements to address loss and damage, among others. Definitely what I would say here, it's like the NCQG is certainly not framed in a vacuum, nor is it static. So more when we consider the rapidly changing circumstances and what science is constantly telling us, which also makes it challenging for us as negotiators, since we must be aware of that this process being of utmost importance needs to inform and be informed by other ongoing and emerging processes. So how, like, having more clarity on how all these pieces fit together could contribute to enhance the synergies amongst them and promote reinforcing outcomes that are conducive to the achievement of the systemic transformations that are required to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, and the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So I would leave it there and very open to having and engaging with more questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for your reflections and also highlighting the priorities you would want to see this year. And now we open the floor for questions, and also maybe before we see Fiona still online. So if any of the panelists want to reflect on what has been said before, I'll give them a chance. So please let me know, any of the panelists, if you want to reflect on what others have said before you. Or after you. Okay, I think we are good here. And yeah, so I think we'll go to the Q&A. So I have some questions here. So this is probably a question to everyone on the panel. So in order to make progress on the NCQG, do you think the work under the ad hoc work program, meaning the submissions, the technical expert dialogues, and the high-level ministerial dialogues are adequate, or should parties consider additional processes? So maybe I'll start in the same order. Jan, if you could reflect on that first, please go ahead.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was off for, I think, the critical moment in it.
Okay, no problem. So in order to make progress on the NCQG, do you think the work under the ad hoc work program, meaning the submissions and also the text and the high-level ministerial dialogues, do you think they are adequate, or should parties consider additional processes to this ones?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I said something about this in my initial intervention already. I think the theoretical work plan that we have now in front of us sounds really promising to me in terms of how the TEDs and the ministerial dialogues are interacting with each other. I think that, for instance, works. The guided questions beforehand with inviting submissions works. The idea of webinars I discussed a little bit, I think, are quite interesting, and I think one could make much more use of those in order to prepare substantive inputs rather than using the time of the TEDs for that. All that works. As I said already, is that I wonder if some of the issues, or I'm thinking about two issues in particular. One is loss and damage, and the other one is the distinction between the provision of support to meet support needs and the provision of the mobilization of finance to meet investment needs on the other hand, how to treat them, because they need different treatment. And this speaks to what Dominic said about a multi-layered goal. You could have exactly both things, and if you assure everyone you will have both, don't worry, that make a lot of things a lot more easier. For instance, that could be an outcome of the high-level ministerial dialogue in 2023 to say, yeah, you'll get your 100 billion style part, but we also want something to move investments. We want to flesh out that as another pillar of the new goal or a sub goal or whatever. I think everyone would be much more happy to continue the conversation, because no one is afraid of losing the stuff that are dear to them. If we all agree anyway, we respect that we will have to have them in there. Anyway, so getting that into the process and that assurance is the difficult task of the high-level ministerial dialogue to get going. And in theory, in the work plan, I can see that happening. In practice, I wonder if it will, given the past experience we have with engaging ministers on issues that are sometimes sound a lot of as if they were quite technical. But in principle, I'm very optimistic, and it comes down at a few crunch points we have, whether or not it will actually work.
Thanks a lot, Jan. Assetu, please go ahead for the same question.
Thank you, Mahalet, and thank you for the participant that posed that question. I think it's a really relevant question, and considering the process we are in right now, and there are other complementary processes that really need to be factored, taken into account. For example, we are having this loss and damage process, which currently the establishment of the fund, which as we speak right now, the issue of loss and damage has not been adequately reflected in the discussions, especially this time get around. We had so many people talked about it. So I think the process that is going on right now in trying to come up with a funding arrangement for loss and damage, the inputs from those processes are things that we considered in this process. Besides that, I specifically had mentioned about the definition for climate finance, which is a process under the Standing Committee on Finance, which I think it's a very relevant process that complements this NCQG process specifically, because I think with regards to enhancing transparency, this would be key to avoid what we had experienced during the 100 billion goal era, because we had realized that we had some double counting that some parties may not agree to, but in fact, it was a fact because we had different reports presenting different options that have been mobilized, which I don't think should have been the case. So having a climate finance definition would definitely address this issue to some extent. So I think that process as well is very key, and that would be really useful for this NCQG process. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I said to Dominic, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, and I'd agree with the comments of the past two speakers, particularly, the SCF is doing this technical work for a reason. Yeah, we absolutely must use it. I would also add, the work plan is comprehensive, but it is just such a huge challenge to really grip this whole agenda. So I think there are two other things that come to mind in terms of what else we need to be thinking about. One, as was touched on, is other processes within the UNFCCC, and perhaps this is something for the Secretariat and Simon Steele's team, but how in this new goal do we have a relationship with the global goal on adaptation, for example, the Global Stocktake and the enhanced transparency framework? All of these processes need to be interconnected. The discussion on the global goal, I took part in with our minister in Copenhagen last week. It showed that developing countries are very focused on the finance element of this for obvious reasons. We haven't really achieved balance, so we need to rapidly scale up adaptation finance. So how can we give confidence that this is being dealt with in the NCQG process and doesn't perhaps need to be duplicated in the GGA? Enhanced transparency framework, I think Assetu mentioned the transparency point, and again, how can that framework that we've negotiated over years and years, adequately be fit for purpose for this new goal? And then the other thing that just occurs to me is just the intellectual side, which is, negotiators, we're smart people, we're engaged in this world, but gripping all of the technical factors in the discussion around investment needs and key sectors and levels of concessionality is quite complex. And what I've found extremely useful, particularly in TED 5, was the interventions from speakers, the presentations, and one report in particular I'll flag because we have had some discussions with this group is the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance. So the UK and Egyptian presidencies set this up last year. It's being co-chaired by Vera Songway and Nick Stern, and it has a committee of maybe 20 experts from all over the world, from different sectors, who have produced this report, and it tries to address some of these issues in a really deep academic and intellectual way. Total investment needs, in the trillions, how could these be met? What level of public finance needs are likely to be within that total investment need? How we deal with debt distress? So getting some of the heavy lifting on the intellectual side, I think we should make sure to keep that into the process and keep these inputs coming into the TEDs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dominic. Sophia, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. And yeah, I think like we also completely agree with what has been said before, and I would like to maybe emphasize on one point I used in the initial intervention, which is the NCQG is definitely not framed in a vacuum. So we have to be we have to have a dialogue, constant dialogue with other processes within and outside like the climate regime. Obviously, we do have to, but also bearing in mind what the mandate is. Also considering like the time constraints we have and the huge task we have in front of us. We do believe that we should strive also to, and again, talking about balances, to find also these balances between accountability and ambition, because at the end, we really want the NCQG to be instrumental to the achievement of the Paris Agreement. So I think like having said that, it would be also like building and elaborating, for instance, in the proposal, like in the role of, and once we understand better how like these processes fit together, also to understand better the synergies, because I think that's missing in the discussion. So also to see where we are overlapping, where it's self-reinforcing, and that could also nurture a lot the discussion, always having in mind like the needs and priorities of developing countries, and how this would be enhancing to the fulfillment within this framework. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for this round of answers. And I believe Jan wants to say something. Jan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to come back to something that Isato said on the definition of climate finance. I mean, I agree with the principal points. I know this will be tricky to get across or to get, Anyway, but I thought when I said, okay, the themes and the topics sound right, I thought the issue of the definition is also maybe part of the transparency discussion. When you talk about what are you providing or mobilizing, how do you count it, what do you count, and so forth, report transparently. And then, but then of course it struck me, but you need to clarify against what do you then report transparently. And that makes me think, other than the 100 billion goal, the new NCQG needs a discussion or clarity on the metrics of the numbers you will eventually plug into the wording of the goal. So when you say our new goal is 200 billion, whatever, you need to be clear, what are we talking about? Are we talking about investments? Are we talking about support? Are we talking about grants or grant equivalents when you talk about these numbers? And what do we mean by 200 billion? Is this 200 billion in climate-related development assistance, or is it 200 billion and purely dedicated on the climate aspects of whatever programs are being funded? All these questions become transparent when you have a good transparency mechanism in place, and the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement can input into that, of course, but won't be able to do the job on its own because the goal will be bigger than what is now being reported in the ETF. In theory, you need to, when you set a number, you need to agree what does the number mean, and not leave it up to the interpretation of those who then contribute towards achieving it. But ideally, having a broad conversation, and that includes a discussion on the metrics. The metrics, as I said, grants, grant equivalents. Are we talking investments? Are we talking what are we talking when we say this number? Yeah, so I really wanted to support what Isato said. This definition question, even though I can anticipate that this might be a bit painful to discuss because views are so diverging, at least in the past, but it may be needed to make sure we all understand the same when we say 100 billion 2.0, if you know what I mean. So when the number is there finally. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Tian. We have time for maybe another round of question. So this other question is, when do you think parties should start discussing quantum, not just the determination of needs, but actual figure? Some parties are of the view that quantum should be discussed later in 2024. So maybe, Sophia, you can start on this one.
Well, we already have our work plan, so we know like that's going to be one of our coming topics. I wouldn't like to prejudge how the discussion will be. Definitely, it's going to be settled. It's going to be an ongoing process. So we're going to start talking about quantum. We're going to start seeing how it will look like, how it will be determined, and also connecting to what Jan was saying, like the metrics here will play a fundamental role. Also to understand, like, will it be just an overarching, like goal, or will it be divided if there is a structure of the goal that it's, for instance, divided into thematic areas. So we will start seeing this after the coming dialogue. So this is something to be seen, not one to prejudge still, but definitely something we're very interested to engage with since the very beginning in this year. So we welcome this topic for the next TED, and we'll just keep track of how it will evolve through time.
Thanks a lot, Sophia. Dominic, you want to add to this point?
Yeah, I might echo something very similar to what Sophia has said. I think, if you had to guess, I think you would expect that the quantums would be part of the final package and the final agreement in 2024. But we have a work plan to discuss it next at the next technical expert dialogue, and I think that's useful because it will allow us, following on from what Jan was saying a little bit, to help frame the political level discussions on the quantum. So, when we're talking about a figure, as we've said, I think we need to be clear about what type of figure we're discussing, and ideally, our political overlords are not just given an open question about the quantum, but a set of options. And so the scope and the structure of the goal will need to play into any discussion of the figure. If we're talking about an international public-based support goal, it's in one spectrum. If we're talking about a total investment goal, something like the Climate Policy Initiative's landscape on climate finance measures 700 billion of climate finance being invested globally, it's in a different spectrum. So I think we need to build on what we've done at TED 5 in terms of the options for the scope, start to identify ranges or options of figures associated with each of those types of structure for the goal, and then help that inform the political discussions down the line. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dominic. And now probably we'll just have one more question. So that would be for you, Asetu and Ian. So what voices, for example, parties, private sector, NGOs, academia, civil society organizations, etc., should be added or prioritized within the discussions of the NCQG? Asetu, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mahlet. Considering the list you've already highlighted, I think all stakeholders are important. For me, I think it's really important for us to note that the objective of this NCQG process is to achieve the Paris Agreement, which is ultimately for us to have a world that pursues low carbon emission and low carbon emission and resilience development. So if we really want to achieve that, we really need to bring all stakeholders on board, especially the politicians, because for me, considering the 100 billion goal experience, for me, actually, the main failure for us not achieving that goal was because of the lack of political will, which some parties would say they had provided. I think for me, that was really a main obstacle for us not achieving that goal and ensuring that all stakeholders are brought on board, because we could realize that within the mobilization of the 100 billion goal, we could realize that only we had less, we had realized less resource mobilization from the private sector, which is key as well, which is a point that some parties would argue about, but especially for mitigation, I think private sector can do a lot. And with regards to research and all of that, academia, the private CSOs, NGOs, they are all relevant. We really need to bring everyone on board for us to realize our objective. Thank you.
Thanks, Asetu. Jan, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, in order not to repeat, maybe just add a new one that wasn't mentioned in the question, is the I wonder if we need also more scientific input into understanding the needs of countries. For instance, in the last TED, we were told, I think it was 2.6 trillion in annual investments I need, or whatever the figure was. Annual investments we need. Apparently, there's also a public figure part of that, but there's yet information to be provided on mitigation, at least. How much support would these need, or how much finance is needed to cover costs? I mean, not investments, but cover costs that need to be, let's say, to buy down the investment costs of investors, or to fund direct action and so forth. We don't have that figure for mitigation, really. And we have a figure for adaptation. We know the costs of adaptation are going up to 300 billion a year by 2030 from the UNEP, from the adaptation gap report. So we have that figure, and we can then see, okay, how much of that these costs should be facilitated to be met through the new goal on adaptation, but we don't have a corresponding one on the mitigation, the cost aspect of mitigation. We have something on the investments we need to mobilize, and that's really helpful, but we don't have an indication how much injection of public money from developed countries, for instance, would be needed to trigger that sort of investment if then spent well or right. And that is something that scientists can help us in modeling and then informing the debate in the next year.
Thanks a lot, Jan, and thanks everyone. And now I will give you each a minute to, if you want to have like a concluding remark, I mean, based on the discussions we had. So Sophia, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. And yeah, I'll just kind of for concluding, I would say, and I wouldn't actually talk about concluding because this is just like a very, very big process. So for closing at least today's session, I think that there are very interesting perspectives that have to be taken into account, notably like the scope of the NCQG, also like the financing mix that would be required, for instance, and we could just like also building on what Asetu was saying before, it might be different for mitigation, for adaptation, and for loss and damage. How do we also take into account the inputs from other processes and how do they nurture the NCQG and how the NCQG also fits into other processes? I would say also that there's a need of the engagement of all stakeholders because the needs are in trillions and we need their engagement, participation. And in that sense, we also have to be listening and talking to other stakeholders in their language so that they can also like embed this in their DNA, you know, and see like how do we all are working towards the same purpose. And we negotiators, as was said before, like we try to do our best to try to have like the more comprehensive view we can. And also, but we also have like challenges and we are always open to have like receiving these inputs also that to nurture our discussions, especially because we are convinced that these discussions should be informed by science and also the needs of developing countries, which elaborating on that point, there's also a need to support the capacity of developing countries to be able to have a cost of their needs, because this has also been a bottleneck. So sometimes we're asking, what do we need? But what are the capacities for these developing countries to have these costs? And these are very robust processes that are require a lot, and sometimes we need also to strengthen the capacities of developing countries, and this could also be taken into account in the NCQG. And finally, to say that, yeah, we're talking about a quantum, but that also has a very important qualitative element, either in the metrics or in principles that could accompany this process, so that we have a clear and shared understanding of what that is, what the relevant elements are, and how to fulfill them in the sense of like accounting for the accountability side of it, but also to the scope that it has, and the objective it should serve to under the Paris Agreement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. Dominic, if you have any concluding remarks, please.
I'll be very brief because that was so comprehensive from Sophia, and no, I'm sure you guys will summarize more comprehensively, but two things just come to mind to emphasize really. One is around engagement. I think this kind of space is really useful just to have an exchange of ideas slightly outside of the UNFCCC format. I'd encourage all third-party stakeholders who are engaged in this to try and join the TEDs, submit to the co-chairs. We want as many inputs as possible and as rich a discussion as possible to make sure all views are being taken into account. And then a final point just on, I think any efforts that we developed and developing countries and civil society can make to help address trust and bridge the communication gap would be extremely beneficial. I think, we have one opportunity now over the next 12 or 18 months to agree a goal that may stand for the next 5, 10, 20 years. I go back to the CBD conversation in a process where they don't have on the nature and biodiversity negotiations, where they don't have this kind of history and difficulties around trust related to finance. They've agreed something quite comprehensive, which seems quite fit for purpose, and to me displays quite a good vision about how the world should be moving forward. And I think it would be a shame if we didn't do that. So really understanding what developing countries need to see, how we can push the solidarity bar upwards, while also expanding the vision of the goal, I think would be extremely beneficial. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. I say to, would you like to have some, concluding remarks, please?
Thank you, Marlet. I think Dominic and Sophia has really highlighted so many great summary points or reflections, concluding reflections. For me, I'll pick up from what where Dominic talked about solidarity. I think it's really important for us to, when we are in this technical expert dialogue space, for us to know that we are doing this for a purpose, to save the world, and it will be really good that we put away our negotiating lens and work together to ensure that we come up with something that would really save the world. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I say to Jan, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe because much has been said already, just to follow on what Dominic has said on the CBD having a good outcome, perhaps because it wasn't so politicized as the climate finance negotiations usually are. To overcome that, if developed countries were to present, or some developed countries or a group of them or whatever, high-level ambition group or whatever you want to call it, would present a few offers they can make. They can say, look, we are really concerned about 2.1C, but let's be honest, we acknowledge we need to talk about the provision of support. And here's our offer. If we get a goal on mobilizing investments, and then of course have a discussion who is to mobilize, but anyway, leave that. We are going to also have a part of the new goal as a distinct element on the provision of support. And here's our offer on what we think we can do on including loss and damage in the discussion. And here's our offer on other aspects that are dear to some developing countries. And just like be honest, say, look, let's depoliticize it. Let's be honest. We understand we will continue providing support. We're not denying that. But here's our offer, how we can give you the assurance how it might be reflected in our view in the new goal without trying to gloss over it and only talk about 2.1c, because that's kind of the perception of some, at least some developing countries, that that's happening too much in these negotiations, and then no one really wants to move to the other side to try to build a compromise. And one side could start doing this in the course of this year, or at the high-level ministerial dialogue at the end of the year.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot, everyone. So with our last few minutes, I'd like to thank you for your participation in this critical conversation. We have reached an inflection point in the climate crisis. There is a need for decisive climate action, and climate finance will continue to play an important role in our response. The need for an informed and ambitious NCQG is clear, and the ad hoc work program will be key to shaping it. As we heard from Fiona, the work plan is based on the views we heard at COP27 and the submission received earlier this year, as well as the views shared during TED 5. By the end of the year, it's expected that the ad hoc work program will develop recommendations that will be further refined through 2024, leading up to COP29. Additionally, 3 more TEDs are scheduled, with the next one being held in June. Today, as we reflected on the process so far, our panelists made a number of key observations. The work plan's interaction between the TEDs and the high-level ministerials is welcome. Jan noted in ending the TED session with an agreement on which issues should be resolved from the high-level ministerial dialogue is welcome. However, it will always be challenging to agree on those issues. TEDs are a critical part of the process, and there is a need to ensure that there is enough time to discuss the issues and that discussion remains focused. Our panel noted that this year it's crucial that the TEDs are structured and focused in order to reach a meaningful outcome. I say to identify the number of priorities that have emerged of TEDs to include a clear time frame, whether medium or long-term, the quantum and the qualitative elements and transparency arrangements. In terms of the expectations for the high-level ministerial dialogue at COP28, Dominic narrowed it down to 2 points: substance and format. To pinpoint the substance of the goal, we need a political level steer to identify the scope of the goal. The goal must address the needs of developing countries. With regards to format, there's a need to provide more structure in the options provided to ministers and discussions while still ensuring a dialogue takes place. Going forward, Sophia advocated for incremental active decisions to shepherd the process to COP29, where we must arrive at a more substantive decision at COP29. In addition, we must ensure the NCQG should not be developed in a vacuum. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for bringing their insight and expertise to bear. We have an upcoming series of technical papers that will be published in collaboration with our partners that build on the key issues discussed today. The next paper will be on the structure of the NCQG. You can stay up to date on this and find other resources on our website, cfinadvisors.org. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much, everyone.